I think a couple of days ago, November 10th, was the actual midway calendar point between week 1 of the college football season and the national title game. 70 days before.
That's not right.
Days after. It's just crazy that you're playing games that deep into January.
Welcome back to the latest edition of The Audible, presented by Trader Joe's. I'm Bruce Feldman, joined as always by my colleague from The Athletic, Stuart Mandel. No Ralph Russo today. Ralph is on assignment. He will be back with us for the weekend show, as we hope you are. You can join us on Sunday morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, on YouTube Live at Audible Show, where we will recap all of the weekend's action. We have a really good show today. We're going to be joined in a little bit by Josh Pate. If you follow college football on YouTube, or you just follow college football anywhere, you probably know who Josh is. He has a massive following. We're also going to get to your email questions later in the show, as well as touch on some very intriguing coaching carousel news. But before we get to a lot of that, Stu, the LSU story with Brian Kelly has been messy for a while. It just got even messier. So with this lawsuit where they're trying to get out of paying him $53 or $54 million as what they owe him, do you think LSU has any chance of winning this lawsuit?
I don't think so. I don't think it'll ever go to court because it's so ridiculous. You have on the day he was fired, there's a LSU press release announcing he's been fired. You have Scott Woodward quoted in there, basically saying he made that decision after the A&M game, like clearly saying this is for performance. And now a couple weeks later, they're saying, Scott Woodward has since been fired, and they're saying, hey, Scott Woodward never had the authority to fire you. So you haven't actually officially been terminated, and we could still terminate you for cause, which would get them out of paying the $53 million. What I've said is, Bruce, if they have some sort of incriminating thing to fire him for cause, it would have come out by now, right? Like, why would you hold on to that? So no, I mean, if I were Brian Kelly, I would fight for every penny, right? I mean, if he goes and gets another coaching job, that offsets it, obviously. But I would not say, I think in the course of that lawsuit, it says he did discuss possibly settling for a lower amount. Why would you do that now after they provoked this fight?
Yeah, I had heard from one prominent sports attorney, and he gave me his opinion and just said, LSU is cooked. Louisiana law doesn't recognize LSU's stupidity as a reason not to pay Brian Kelly, end quote. So, as this one will probably keep twisting and turning, much like the coaching carousel is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting offshoot of this, and I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, is this level of dysfunction, which is off the charts even by Southern football standards. There's been a lot of crazy things to happen around coaching searches before. Not necessarily one where the governor fires the AD, and then the school says he didn't have the authority. Anyway, is what it does for their pool, Bruce, because in a vacuum, I think LSU is the best job that's open, more so than Florida, more so than Penn State. It's a place where we know you can win a national championship, and there's a lot going for it. But if you're a coach who has options, like a Lane Kiffin, and you're looking at what's going on here now, including the fact that now they are trying to get out of paying somebody money they owe them, why would you touch that job?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, if you are a Lane Kiffin or you're a prominent Power 4 head coach, you're looking for is alignment, right? And I think the best thing right now, if you're Ole Miss, is you have alignment. And you have it in terms of in your collective / NIL world of the portal and talent acquisition. It's obviously paid off really, really well. We've talked about this a bunch on this show in the past. Walker Jones, former Ole Miss player, former CAA agent / former Under Armour executive. He's been a very good fit, and they have been out in front ahead of the curve on that operation. Also, Lane Kiffin and his extended family, his younger brother, Chris, and his wife and kids, they're all there. Lane's family's all there. He's going to, barring a epic collapse that we've never seen before in college football, they're going to make the playoff. right? Whether they get upset in the Egg Bowl or not, they're still going to make the playoff. They would have to lose both games down the stretch. We just don't see that happening. And then, all of a sudden now it's like the timing of what's your next move, even if he has any interest in Florida or LSU, that gets really complicated. I just would expect at some point in the not too distant future, Ole Miss will put out, some smoke to basically say, hey, we love what we got here. We're going to make sure Lane feels that he's got everything he needs, and we're going to lock him up going forward. And then if you're LSU, I think you're looking at it going, do we feel like we can take a group of 5 head coach who we may like, but you know what? Maybe this person's never been a head coach at the Power 4 level, but our options may dwindle a little bit. I think you and I talked about this offline a couple of days ago, where they went for the splash hire last time and it blew up in their face. Brian Kelly wasn't a good fit there. So now it's like, let's find somebody who's a really good fit, who we trust and we believe in, and let's take our chances with that. Because to go forward quick on this, Chris Vanini did an interesting column where he kind of revisited, including your coaching grades from the 2021 cycle, which Brian Kelly was a part of. And what I thought was telling was most of the hires that worked out the best were really first-time head coaches. They weren't the splash name or whatever. Lincoln Riley was in that. Obviously, Brian Kelly was in that. But it was a lot of whether it was Marcus Freeman, there was a bunch of other guys.
Kalen
It wasn't
DeBoer
100%.
was in there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Kalen DeBoer wouldn't be the first-time hire. He would be the guy who bounced up a level, and moved up. But for the most part, it was the new head coaches. And it doesn't mean, Brent Venables, we'll see if that one's going to work out. It hasn't gone great, but he's one of the few, and Brent Pry also would fit in that category of the first-time head coach that didn't work, but there was a bunch of other guys that did. So maybe LSU looks at that and go, let's just get this right and not worry about making the splashy announcement at the press conference.
Well, there's a lot of good candidates between, like you kind of went to 2 ranges there, right? Lane Kiffin, big name, SEC head coach, or a group of 5 head coach. There are certainly other Power 4 coaches. I would hope somebody's going to give Brent Key a look at Georgia Tech. I know it's his alma mater, but
I think that's the different thing, though, on this one, Stu. You have a bunch of guys who fit in that category, whether it's Jeff Brom, Kenny Dillingham. They're already Clark Lee.
Kenny
they're already
Dillingham
at their
flat
alma
out
mater.
said he told his team he's staying. So
yeah,
you can take him off the list. Real quick, are there any other updates at one of these prominent jobs that you've heard as we get closer to hiring day?
I mean, there's one thing that's like, I don't want to call it a non-starter, but when the Giants job came open and Brian Daboll got fired a few days ago, I had some industry source say they're going to have interest in Marcus Freeman. And then that person and I reconnected and was like, yeah, Marcus Freeman has 0 interest in that job. So I think you have a case
Notre Dame
of
fans, good news.
Yeah, it is good news. I think you have a good thing going there, and they made a shrewd bet on the first-time head coach who people loved there, and it's going great. So that's one thing. But I think you're going to see a lot of other stuff unrelated to that probably heat up in the next week and a half.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will have on our guest, Josh Pate.
All right, Stu, we're pleased to be joined by our guest today, Josh Pate. If you were a college football fan, and especially if you're a college football fan who is online, which almost everybody is these days, you probably know all about Josh Pate. Josh, thanks for joining us today on The Audible.
Yeah, it looks like we got a little cell phone signal going on right here. Just right up, linear, looks good, signal strong.
So you are prolific, and you go to your YouTube page, you have almost 500,000 subscribers. It's a brand you have built over a long time. For people who aren't familiar with your backstory, some of the gaps we can fill in as a guy who grew up in Georgia, did not go through a traditional or as traditional as sports media backgrounds get. That was not your path. If somebody had told 10-year-old Josh, this is what your living would be, what would you have thought of how this path would go? And what were the things that kind of actually the turning points, I guess, to get you in this direction?
I think 10-year-old Josh would have said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was a kid, didn't really understand the realities of the world. 20-year-old Josh probably would have said, that's great, man. That's awesome news. You're doing what you love. You're living out your dream. How are you ever going to make that happen? So, I mean, look, I've followed both of your guys' work for a long time. You were already established when I was coming out of high school. I'm in college. Truthfully, like, I didn't take that stuff as serious as I should have. So some of my friends, I mean, they're just locked down. They're really mature. They go 4-year college. They're off into the real world. Just wasn't me. Didn't have my act together at that age. And so I went to school. Like, I got a degree in mass communication from Columbus State University, but there's no real purpose behind it at that point. And then, you know, I went and worked manual labor. I worked construction for a little while. This is late 2000s. Worked heating and air installation, worked in warehouses down in Georgia, just manual labor. It's what you do when you don't have your act together in your early 20s. And I would immerse myself in sports talk radio. I loved college football, love baseball too, but really love college football. But that's what I would do. I would consume it. I was a consumer, and I'd look around and I would see you guys. I would read your work. I would turn on ESPN. I would see the people who have made it in the industry, and I would see the paths that they had taken to make it in the industry. And I think to myself, well, you're certainly not on that path, and you don't have a last name that's going to open any magical doors for you. You don't know anyone in the industry. So 20-year-old Josh probably would have said, how are you going to make that happen? And so the way I made it happen was I beat the door down in Georgia on every program director that I could, whether it be local television or local radio, until finally one let me come in and just observe live production. I didn't even ask to be put on air. I just wanted to watch radio happen. And so WIOL 1580, 95.7 The Zone there in Columbus, Georgia, the ESPN radio affiliate, they allowed me to do that. Kind of unbeknownst to them, I had just taken my free time, Bruce. Over the previous 2 years, I had just taken my free time, whatever I had. For me, that was the hour and a half I drove around in my truck every day to and from work and class. And I listened to a speaker a while back talk about reallocating time, repurposing time from time spent to time invested. How do you use the free time you have to get what you want out of life? So for me, I wanted to be in sports media. That meant hitting the mute button on the radio in the truck, stop listening to music, and just start simulating sports talk radio. I would do it. I would talk to my steering wheel for 90 minutes to 2 hours every day. That's where I was going to get my reps. No one was going to put me on air, so I was getting my reps that way. So you fast forward a couple of years, you're sitting there in the afternoon drive radio studio. Guy calls in sick. They're putting a pinch. They throw you on air. That's your break. You don't know what's coming when you wake up that morning, but that's your break. And so we did afternoon drive. There's the middle of the South. It's the middle of college football season. Loved it, of course. I loved it. Would anyone else love it? So we got done with the show that day. The PD comes in, the host, they were asking me, where have you worked before? Because I had done the stuff in my steering wheel, like driver seat so much, it sounded like I had on-air repetition, which I didn't. But they never took me off air. So I got my start that way doing radio. And then 2 years later, I got a cold call from a local television general manager, the NBC affiliate there in Columbus, Georgia. He said, I listen to you every day. You don't know it. You've never met me, but you kind of do a version of college football on radio that we'd love to do on local TV here. We're right in the middle of Alabama, Georgia, Auburn, Florida State, Clemson. Like, we think we're a really underrated hotbed of a market here, which they were right about. They said, would you be interested in doing that? Never done TV in my life. Just walked into it cold, started doing that, did that for a few years, ended up becoming the sports anchor there after I finished school, ended up elevating to becoming a news anchor there over the next 2 to 3 years. But that is mid-20 teens, and that's really when the game changes, because that's really when you first pick up a phone or you first look at your Facebook feed or your YouTube channel or YouTube page and you see live. You see someone is going live on Facebook. You see someone's going live on YouTube. And once that happened, for people like me, that's a Berlin Wall. Those are a couple of Berlin Walls coming down, because that means you got a shot. That means finally overhead and distribution are not barriers to entry for you. Now, if you suck, you're never going to make it. But at least if you think you can do a halfway decent college football show, in my case, but it could have been politics, it could have been music, whatever, that's your shot. So immediately I repurposed in my mind how I was going to go about, calibrating my future. And I started really doing what I do now. I started it in its very infancy of doing a YouTube channel. It got shut down very quickly because in those contracts on those local television deals, it's got do not compete and you're not going to do it out of here. We're paying you for. So I had to wait a year, let my contract expire, came to an agreement with the TV station there that I would agree to work 1099 for them as their news anchor if they would give me an hour of studio time for my own purposes every night, which they agreed to because it was going to save them a ton of money and not pay me a salary anymore. And so I started my YouTube channel and went on, and it scaled fairly good. But the 2019 LSU run is really when it jumped, because I picked them to win the national title in summer, kind of before everyone was infatuated and in love with Joe Burrow and Ed Orgeron and that whole crew. So we kind of caught fire in Louisiana, and then it spread. And then the show got pretty big pretty quick. CBS, 24/7 Sports at the time, they call in 2019 and say, do you want to come up here and do this for us? Shannon Terry called me, said, do you want to come up here and do this for us? And I said, absolutely. So I came to Nashville in January of 2020. COVID sets in immediately, so everyone goes home. And we have the opportunity to get emergency clearance into the building, just myself and my director. And so we did the show all during the spring and summer of 2020. Didn't even know if we were going to have games. We ended up, though, just like blowing the channel up almost immediately because people just wanted hope. They wanted to talk about something other than infectious disease experts. And so by the time people came back to the office, whether it be in Manhattan at CBS or Fort Lauderdale or Nashville, our show was already making money. So no one ever really touched it. No one ever really interfered with it. And from that point, we've just, kind of hit the gas on it. Sort of negotiated complete ownership of it a couple of years ago. So I own the show, I own the feeds, I own the channel, I own the IP. And now it's a rocket ship and you just get to do what you love for a living. But I know to some people, it looks like we just started this thing out of nowhere. I promise you, we didn't start it out of nowhere. It happened like very slowly all of a sudden, if you will.
Yeah. And it's a story. It's a very unique story, but also one I think a lot of people can relate to in this business of like, you work hard, and you wait for that break. Yep. You don't know where it's going to come from or from whom, but you better take advantage of it. Now, when you were saying that you used to talk into your steering wheel, I was like, aha, that might explain what I was going to ask about, which is, so people who haven't listened to or watched Josh's show, it's not like this one where the two of us or the three of us, when Ralph is here, have a conversation with each other, right? That's kind of the typical studio show or podcast format. Josh basically has a conversation with himself for an hour. And I was just wondering, like, what that is like, how you, like, if it were me doing that 5 minutes in, I'd be like, are people, am I making a good point? Am I not? I'm getting no feedback here, but yeah, tell us about your process. And, like, for instance, we're recording this on a Wednesday. There was a CFP ranking show last night, which I'd imagine you didn't have a lot of time to prepare after that to go on, and you just start the show and riff.
Yeah. What helped me the most, like the best prep for that was when I lived down in Columbus, like when I would work, for instance, in the fabric warehouse. I worked there for several years. Your buddies are working the same kind of jobs all around town. Your buddies all love the same thing you do. So we're all diehard college football fans. So we go to a place over on River Road in Columbus, Georgia called Clearview Barbecue. Cash only place. Don't even walk in there with the card. And that's all we would do. That's what lunch would be, Stu. We would sit there and we would just talk about college football. And I would think to myself, this is one of the few prescient thoughts that I had back in those days. If I ever did a show, I think this is how I would want it to be. Only I would want it to be solo. Because if you're solo, you're just responsible for you. Like, you don't have to worry about anyone else. I've done a show before where I had a co-host, but you kind of, do you get along all the time? What does it do to the on-air chemistry? So I respected what Colin Cowherd was able to do, because I would watch him do this and I would watch him go solo. And it occurred to me, that's probably really hard to do. But if you can ever come close to perfecting that craft, man, it makes your product really valuable. So I would sit there and we'd be at lunch every day. And I would say, if I'm ever sitting in a studio alone, that right there is how I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk no different than I do if you or the three of us are talking in a press box before a game. So my delivery will always be the same, because it's just who I am. I will talk conversationally, just like I am at this lunch table if we're sitting there at Clearview Barbecue on a Tuesday afternoon. And if you're halfway good at theater of the mind concepts, which you have to develop in radio, and if you're halfway good at communicating with people through a microphone instead of talking at them into a microphone, then it should be a seamless transition. There's no difference when they wheel a camera into the studio. Those were my thoughts. That's easier said than done, obviously, but it's the format and it's the vibe that we try and strike with the show to where, I mean, if you're driving around Sioux City, Iowa, and you're listening to me talk about the upcoming Oregon-Iowa game, you really should feel like I'm sitting across from you at the lunch table. And if it doesn't, that means I'm not doing my job. So I know it is very difficult to do it solo. Now I've gotten to where I love it that way. Like I wouldn't have it any other way.
So one thing that jumped out at me just from the start of this show, but also from if you go to the top of your YouTube channel, it will show you, it's probably a 15 minute video, just kind of like, this is the show. This is kind of the brand. And the thing that the word I would use is very clean. There's not a lot of us. There's no stammering. And I think that's probably a gift you have in terms of communication, because like I work with Joel Klatt. Joel is very clean. He didn't have the traditional, he's a former player, he's on the analyst side, but also was doing sports talk radio for a while. And he is very clean in how his delivery is. And there's a lot of people who went to school for that and they can clean it up. And you obviously get better with the more reps. I have no idea what it sounded like in the truck, whatever it was, 14 years ago or however many years ago. I was curious how clean it was then. How did you get to that point? And then when you were doing this kind of monologue and you have your internal producer in your head and you're sitting there thinking, okay, am I going too long here? Do I always know where I'm going? How much do you script out? How does it flow? Because you are doing a show, and whether, for me on the weekends, I'm in the Fox studio and I have a producer going, all right, for this, we have 40 seconds. We may be talking about Iowa, Oregon an hour later in a different format. You may have 90 seconds as opposed to 40. I'm curious how that works for you and what the transition's been like from the guy in the truck who had no professional experience to now the guy who has a ton of reps.
Yeah. The thing you talked about there, I don't want to gloss over what you said. You talked about having time cues, having hard outs, everything that if you worked in broadcast at any level, you're familiar with. The beauty of the podcast space, the beauty of the YouTube space, the entire digital media space is you can have those things if you want to. Obviously, you don't want to do a 5-hour show, but you don't really have to work under those constraints. Now, there is an art and a skill to being able to work under those constraints. But if I feel like I need to go 92 seconds instead of 42 seconds, you've got the freedom to do that, all the while respecting the value of the audience's time. So there's a balance that you strike there. I never really got formal training on what you're talking about. What I did do at the outset is I really remember having that concept of respecting people's time. And so I grew up in the South, very spiritual. And we would have like revivals where other preachers would come in town every week. We would call them gospel meetings, but most people would call them revivals. And every now and then we'd have a preacher come in from out of town. So you're unfamiliar with them. And you've gotten used to your guy and you've gotten used to his cadence and his flow and his way of delivering points. And a guy would come in and he'd go like 13 minutes longer than your normal guy would. And I would sit next to my grandma, call her Meemaw, and she would say, if this guy would stop once he's done preaching, he'd be good. But he can't stop. He just keeps talking long after the sermon's done. And I never wanted to be like that. So what I thought to myself is, if you're ever going to make a point, could be several layers to it, could be a lot of side points you want to make along the way. It ought to be like GPS. So to me, if I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and I want to get to Jacksonville, Florida, I can throw it in the GPS. It could take me 65 south, all the way down through Montgomery. It could take me 24 to Chattanooga, over to 75 down through Atlanta, but it's going to have a start point and an end point. But the important part's the end point. Like, it knows where it's going. To me, the point should be the same way. To me, anytime you open your mouth, you shouldn't really be doing that and just feeling your way out and hoping to find the point during the free fall. Otherwise, just sit there with your mouth shut or don't do a segment on it or whatever the case may be. So that's what helps me, is to know, where am I taking this? Where am I going with this? And at that point, hopefully you have the God-given gifts of speech and whatnot, and you can present, and that's really out of your control. But the other side note to that is I was intoxicated by the feeling of live tightrope walking type production, minimal notes, never use a teleprompter because I used it in local news and I hated it. And so I wanted to remove as much of that production as possible. Like I grew up a big pro wrestling fan. I didn't know how pro wrestling worked. I've since kind of, long since gotten into listening to podcasting on pro wrestling, the business side of it. And I was always fascinated that these guys, especially in the old school, in the old days, they would get an ending. They'd show up to the building. They'd be given their ending for the night. This is how the match concludes. This is who goes over. Elsewhere, you guys figure it out in the ring. And that blew my mind because you watch what those guys do, and it takes a lot of skill. And it's basically a dance. It's just a very, very athletic dance. And you're performing in front of tens of thousands of people. And you're telling me you guys don't know what you're going to do in 10 seconds and you're going to try and make it look good. That's how I love our segments to be. I love the anatomy of one of our shows to be, I know the finish lines to the points I want to make, but it's really awesome. It's an adrenaline rush. It's a tightrope walk, like I said, to be live, which I insist on doing our show in the form of. And just go. And you know what? The worst thing that could happen is you slip up or, you mess up. And look, if we're doing a local newscast, that's a little bit different. If we're doing a college football show, you just learn to be self-deprecating, make fun of yourself on air, and then move on. And then have your team cut a social clip of it and have fun with that, even in post-production. But know where you're going with the point. If you know where you're going with the point, that to me makes the rest of it a whole lot easier.
So what do you think, you obviously have a very strong connection with your audience. And I'm just curious, like we all have kind of different lanes or different parts. Like we're all talking about the same sport, right? You're talking about the same sport on your show that we are. But it doesn't mean we necessarily approach it from the same way. What is your kind of sweet spot, do you think, in terms of your perspective on college football that your audience most connects to?
Never called myself a journalist a single day in my life when I got into this space. Would never call myself a journalist because I got respect for the practice. I got respect for the profession of journalism, and I know I don't do that. So I've never called myself that. I've never presented what we do as reporting because that's not what it is either. I respect the guys and the girls who do that. What I wanted to build was hopefully an ecosystem where you do no different than, like I said, sitting around the lunch table. Anytime news breaks, you just chop it up. You talk about it. I just wanted to present a place to do that. And I also wanted to create, like I said, again, use the same word, the ecosystem that really resonates with people and strikes home with people because they find themselves in that position. I've lived in locker rooms or lived in gyms or lived in the common American workplace for most of my adult life. I know what the conversation sounds like there. And a lot of it, where I've grown up, revolves around college football. So if you present that, people are at work all day. They consume you at their leisure. It's an on-demand world now. But when people listen to you and when people watch or listen to whatever way they consume your show, and it makes sense to them, and there's a lot of commonality to them. There's a lot of overlap, if you will, between how you're talking to them and how, they communicate with their friends. I think that's what resonates because basically they're looking and they're saying, well, he must be one of us. And if they think that, they're making a good point because that's exactly what I am. That's where I grew up. That is who I grew up around. That is who constitutes my social circle even to this day. I'm not someone who, grew up in a completely different subset of American society. And I just dip my toe into college football because, that could be profitable. Oh man, I'm halfway decent at this. I can pretend to care about it. If you are of the audience and you do a half decent job of the presentation, I think it gets accepted pretty quickly because I know it does because our show has.
I want to ask you this because I know you've been fairly outspoken about this, that you would love to be the commissioner of college football. It is a sport that, I don't know, ever since I probably ran into Tim Brando back at CBS, he's always talked about it. And it's gotten more, as the sport seems like it's gotten bigger and more dysfunctional, it seems like there's a bigger need for somebody to take leadership, a specific person. If somebody made you the commissioner of college football, what are the first 2 or 3 things you would do to try to help fix the challenges that the sport has?
Get the smartest people in the room is the first thing. And I'm just going to blindly assume I'm not the smartest guy in the room. So we need way more people in the room, even if it is ultimately up to me.
Who are those smartest people, though? Because, I mean, we get a committee. Like, who would you see as, these are the people who need to be really involved?
I think I don't know the answers to a lot of those. Like, for instance, when it comes to reworking the college football calendar, okay, it's very easy for me to say, man, I'd love for the college football season to end on New Year's Day. I'd love for that to be our national championship game. Well, I mean, both of you guys are more aware than I am, but even I am very aware of how different that broadcast schedule works, how you have to juggle with the NFL, all these sorts of things. Okay, well, what you've got to do then is you got to identify, okay, we got a problem right here. We're recording this November 12th. I think a couple of days ago, November 10th, was the actual midway calendar point between week 1 of the college football season and the national title game. 70 days before, 70 days after. It's just crazy that you're playing games that deep into January. So that's a problem to me. I think a lot of people agree with that. To find the solution, it's not, you can't just tweet it out. It looks good. It may get you some traction on social to tweet it out. There are 37 different holes in the theory of, well, let's just move the title game up to January 1st. But that doesn't mean we can't address it. It just means you got to go find people who are motivated to do it, who actually understand those worlds. It's probably more than one person. And I would just, if nothing else, I'd like to do the work that arrives at the absolute concrete conclusion that it has to be the 3rd week in January. Because I don't really think that legwork's been done. I think there's a lot of pulling up and really not stepping on toes and really being nervous, and everyone's okay because it's making a lot of money. So no one really cares all that much about how the consumer is burdened by all this. College football calendar, portal's going to open up 2nd week of January. They'll figure it out. No one really cares. Well, they'll figure it out. No one really cares has been the logic behind far too many proposals and far too many mechanisms of the way college football operates now. And I guess to a greater extent, college athletics. So the first skill would be to admit that you don't know what you don't know, and just to try and effort getting the right people in the room to make a good college try at figuring it out. The calendar is like one of the first things I would go to, though.
So you're more, and this would be refreshing, actually, you're more interested in kind of like those concrete things that affect the fan experience versus we got to get a clearinghouse for the NIL deals, and we got to make sure, like the kind of things that, frankly, the leaders of this sport spend way more time on, I think, than when the national championship should be.
I do get why they do that, because that's what affects them first and foremost. The calendar's in the abstract. Like they're working year round anyway. It's a year round business for them anyway. So what day the title game happens to them doesn't impact them as much as it does us, as much as it does fans. Yeah, I would absolutely be more interested in placing that kind of stuff on the back burner and figuring out. I mean, it's just, you look at the economic impact studies, for example, of what it would take if, let's say, an Oregon fan goes the rest of the way. They don't go play in the Big Ten title game, or maybe they do, whatever. It's probably going to make the same point. Just to look at what it would take to be a season ticket holder and then to pay for a first round college football playoff package of tickets, and then go to your neutral site in the quarterfinals, and then go to another neutral site in the semifinals, and then go to the national championship game. I understand that a lot of people aren't making those trips in the best of times, but to look at where we are economically right now, to look at how relatively good the sport is doing, and to look at how insanely egregious it is to put that kind of burden on someone who wants to invest in and follow their team to that degree is just I cannot believe that that's the current state of affairs.
There's a million more questions we could ask you, but I'm looking up at the clock. Oh my gosh, it's 30 minutes. That flew by. And offline, Josh, you're going to teach us how to get through a 30-minute podcast without saying, I just did it just now. How about that? We really tell people where to get the show, how often it comes out, all that good stuff.
It's just Josh Pate's College Football Show. It's probably wherever you get your podcast or YouTube. Just search it. If you don't find it, that's on us. It should be pretty easy to find. And we do it 3 nights a week. It's live if you care about it being live. If not, you can consume it whenever you want to.
Sounds good.
Josh,
Well,
thanks for joining us today on the Audible, and
Thank
best
you.
of luck. It's been a cool story to see somebody starting from scratch and literally blowing up the way you have. And as Stu said, one man banding it in a space where there's always it's the solid verbal guys, or Andy and Ari, or this show, or just
Six
almost
people
all
on
of
the
them.
game day desk.
Yeah. So more power to you. Obviously, it worked for Coward. It's worked for Feinbaum, and it's definitely working for you. So it's very cool to see. Congrats on that.
I appreciate you guys having me.
Okay, after this break, we will get to your email questions.
All right, we are going to open the mailbag here in just a couple minutes. But first, our weekly segment where we give you a couple breakout players to watch in this weekend's games. Bruce, who do you got?
I got my eyes on the big Pitt Notre Dame game this weekend. A guy to watch who's been a really good player for the Panthers, Kyle Lewis. He is a tackling machine. He missed a couple of games a few weeks back. He was back last week. I think he had 11 tackles. He's all over the field. He's one of my freaks list guys. He's not exactly under the radar, but I think given the stage of a Notre Dame game, I think a lot more people than just diehard Pitt fans will know about him after this weekend.
All right, since I was just at the USC Northwestern game, the Wildcats play Michigan, high noon Eastern, on Saturday at Wrigley Field. And I mean, you mentioned it the other day when we were talking about that game. Northwestern was able to run the ball and have done that, frankly, most of the season. So I would keep an eye out on Caleb Komalafe, their sophomore running back, who averages 80 yards a game, very powerful between the tackles. I think at this point in the season, like we said before, Bruce, it's hard to bring up people on the CFP type teams because you've probably watched them by now. So there's maybe a little bit more under the radar one for you to watch if you are checking out that Big Ten game this week. And now for the mailbag. As always, send your questions to the audiblepod@gmail.com. Before we get to the questions, Bruce, I just want to address something to the audience. A couple weeks ago, I'm a huge Weezer fan. I think people know that. The Blue Album is right across my shoulder. Anyway, Ralph had this awesome analogy about like bands that have had they've been saving up their first album for 20 years and then they have trouble following that up in the context of coaches. And I said about Weezer, that explains why they wrote one of the greatest albums of all time, the Blue Album, and then Pinkerton. And I've gotten so many emails. How dare you besmirch Pinkerton? I just want to say I regretted that as soon as it came out of my mouth, but didn't think I should backtrack. The downfall for them, like I'm a huge fan. I listen to them all the time, but it's not Pinkerton. That came a couple albums later. Basically, I haven't listened to, or I don't regularly listen to anything they recorded after about 2008. But Pinkerton was an awesome album. Just want to assure everybody about that. Bruce has no idea what I'm talking about. So we will get to another place near and dear to my heart. This is from Sod. I live in Columbia, Missouri, and last week we got our first Trader Joe's. After years of waiting, it opened on Thursday, and people were lined up around the block 2 hours before opening. So my question for you is, if you only had $12, what is the one thing you have to buy at Trader Joe's?
For me, Stu, it is the frozen gnocchi. We go through it quite a bit. It's just kind of a great thing to have in the freezer. If somebody doesn't like what we're having for dinner, we can make it for them because everybody likes it. And it's actually pretty healthy if you look at the nutritionals. The other one, if my daughter had some say-so, she would say would be the Peter crackers. She loves them. What do you got, Stu?
Holy cow. She and I have the same one in common. I was going to say the Peter crackers. So I'll pivot and say the little ice cream cones, kind of like drumsticks.
Ooh, yeah, they are really good.
Very good. Very, low cal because a small dessert. I think he could probably, with the $12, and by the way, I wonder if this was a shameless attempt to get the gift card, could probably afford to buy all of the things we just said. All right, I'm going to move to this question from Tim Taylor. Hey guys, love the show. The addition of Ralph was a surprise and has added a lot, even though his disdain of talking about head coaching changes was ridiculous. Yeah, I think that's one, much like my Pinkerton take, one you would like to have back. With all the college head coaching positions open, do you think there are NFL offensive or defensive coordinators that could be college head coaches?
I think there are, but I think what ends up happening is if you get to the coordinator level in the NFL, you probably know you're really close to getting a head coaching job. And for almost everybody I know, that is a much more attractive quality of life than it is to go be a college head coach right now. I can't tell you how many people I hear from over the last 6 months. It's not daily, but it's more than one a week who talk about, man, I would love to get in the NFL just because of the realities of being a college head coach with their work calendar are very less than desirable if you have a family. The one guy I would say who could be in play most likely of this cycle is an offensive coordinator who's struggling with the Falcons, and that's Zach Robinson. Remember, he was a really good quarterback at Oklahoma State. His alma mater has an opening. He's a guy who spent a bunch of time under Sean McVay, and I think he's somebody that is going to have a good coaching prospects moving forward, whatever happens with the Falcons. But I could see him being in play at Oklahoma State. I'm just not sure, even if he could get the job, whether he would really want to be back there. It's not like all his time as a coach has been in the NFL world, so it's much different than working your way up. But he would be the one guy who I would think is probably most likely to be in play of the NFL coordinators. But you got to keep in mind, the NFL calendar is way different than the college one. So we'll see.
I was just going to say, I think the challenge for these guys that are coordinators in the NFL is if Oklahoma State really wants to hire Zach Robinson, they're going to have to wait until the second weekend of January when their season is over to hire him. And if they're in the playoffs, I don't think the Falcons will be, but somebody else, you're going to have to wait even longer. And are you willing to do that when the portal window opens right after New Year's? Like your head coach wouldn't be there when the portal window opens. So to me, that's even more problematic than like Florida waiting on to see if, Ole Miss gets eliminated in the first round of the playoff.
All right, there's only one portal window. All right, Stu, this question is titled Bad Big Ten, and it is from a, quote, disappointed Big Ten fan. The question is, does the Big Ten hate college football? As he writes, they've killed the Pac-12, proposed a playoff where they get special privileges, then pivoted to an insane 24-team option. They're so bloated that classic rivalries are now not being played, and the good teams often don't play each other. And now they're on the brink of a civil war over a crazy private equity scheme. Somehow, they're wasting some of the best years in conference history with the nutty off-field antics. What do you say, Stu?
I mean, I don't think the Big Ten hates college football, but I think Tony Pate, who came up through television and then Major League Baseball background, truly believes that the pro sports model is superior to the college sports model and is not particularly beholden to any norms of college football and is looking at it as, how do I maximize my revenue? And so you've seen that. I mean, I can't really put the demise of the Pac-12 on him. I realize he took Oregon and Washington, but that the wheels were in motion once his predecessor took USC and UCLA. But with the crazy playoff plan that we've talked about ad nauseum here about how we think it would be a terrible idea, and now this private equity thing, where what's crazy about that is that they're tearing apart they're alienating Michigan, one of their key members, USC, over this thing. That is not necessarily an obvious thing that they should do. I think that's a really good point. He didn't give us his name, huh? Just a disappointed Big Ten fan. That it's overshadowing to some extent that the Big Ten is now, they've won the last two national championships and they have the top two teams in the rankings right now. Like, this is on the field, something that Big Ten fans have waited for a long time, to be able to flex their muscle and thumb their nose at the SEC a little bit. But they've become the villain, right? That I think they've become the villain in the sport, with Tony Pate as kind of the face of it. So I'm interested to see what happens with the 4-4-2-2 playoff thing's not happening. That's not changing for next year. The I keep saying private equity. It's actually not a private equity partner, but we won't get into that. Whether if he actually pushes through with that, even if it means Michigan and USC aren't coming along, because that is just something never in a million years you would think that the Big Ten, which for so long was such a harmonious conference, that it would come to that.
Okay, Stu, who gets the Trader Joe's gift card this week? I don't know. Saad did tee us up on a pretty easy endorsement.
But I think we're setting a dangerous precedent where people will just write in about Trader Joe's specifically to get the Trader Joe's card. I kind of like the third one. What do you think?
Well, I know you like the third one. You were waiting to take a baseball bat to Tony Petit,
if you want the Trader Joe's one, I'll go along with it.
I'm going to go with Saad. He included his name, the bitter Big Ten fan. It's a good question. I know we gave you a free run at the Big Ten there. So,
well, I think Saad played it perfectly here. He's going to get a $12 gift card to spend at the new Trader Joe's that just opened in Columbia, Missouri. So good for him. Good for Trader Joe's. Good for Columbia, Missouri. I can't believe they didn't have one before.
I know. All right. As always, send your questions to the audiblepod@gmail.com, and we will see you next time.
We'll see you specifically Sunday at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, 8:30 a.m. Pacific on YouTube at Audible Show.